talk about both.
Okay, so I think it really does differ depending on whether you're talking about it programmatically, and it also differs depending on whether you're looking at like the different tracks that someone is in. So I mean, I can't speak to all of the program level goals or to all of the various tracks, because there's 8 different areas. You know, one is kind of learning media, one's media design, sound, like, and each of those are different professional areas that have different standards and expectations around documentation. So like a portfolio for someone who's making, you know, experimental sound is going to be very different from someone who's making, you know, physical computing devices and things like that. So I think within that, like, you've also got to break apart that the standards and expectations for documentation vary based on the nature of the medium that you're working with and what you're doing. So that's one component of it, but also, you know, what you're doing in terms of documentation, whether it's for the student who's producing a kind of a portfolio for themselves versus like an instructional kind of a learning portfolio where you're showing like the work that you're doing, where the moments are. Those are, again, 2 very different things. And then like programmatically, you have the idea of wanting to document, to be able to showcase the work to prospective students or to external vendors, which is different from like an instructional goal from the instructors who's just being interested in seeing where learning is happening and being able to evidence that and being able to assess it as well. So like there's lots of different dimensions going on, and there's lots of different competing goals and needs. It really does matter like what perspective you have and like who you ask and what role they have within the program. So I find that like a kind of a really hard question to ask, or at least it's a really hard one to answer, because there's so many different agendas that could inform what the documentation is. Like in terms of doing like physical computing, and in terms of being an instructor, there are certain things that I can talk about wanting to see in a portfolio that I think are kind of helpful. So as an instructor, like I'm focused on the learning outcomes for the students. So I'm interested in a description not just of the outcome, but also the process that someone went through, and then particularly at the end of the process, like what they got from that, like what do they see looking back over their project that they acquired in terms of skills or in terms of competencies, what the hardest parts were, what the challenges, those kind of things. Like, so I can understand where they are as a learner. That's different from like if I'm the student and I'm in that course and I want to show my work to other people outside, like they're not going to be as concerned based, you know, on the reflection or the skills development or the competencies or anything like that. So my view is very particular.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But because we were in your IoT class last year, and we had we use gallery to document our work.
Yep.
And you have like a template for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, do you think it's possible for students to propose like a integrated template, like it fulfills some of your requirements and also shows what they
So yeah, I developed that template because those are the things that I want to see, and those are the prompts that I want to address for the project, so that I can kind of look at what you're getting from them and whether you've kind of learned the things that I'm hoping that you'll learn from them. I think the question becomes like what the portfolio is doing and who the portfolio is serving and what needs are being met. Like if it's used in an instructional context, like for the instructor to be able to compare different kind of documented outcomes, there needs to be some standardization so that you can look across, you can see what's going on. So, you know, asking for a description of the process and asking for a description of the outcomes are often tied to measures or rubrics that are assessed as part of the project. So what I'm hearing from you though is that you're saying like that template should be put in the control of the students. And I think there's a couple of complexities with that. So one, has the student documented before? Do they even know what goes into documentation? If they're from a design background, probably, like they've probably been introduced to it in some make, shape or form, or at least they've gotten a particular kind of view of what design schools look for in terms of documentation. If they come from engineering or CS, they may never have been asked to do, you know, kind of a more kind of project-based documentation. They might have been asked to do reports, and that's what they'll expect to do. So to do documentation for a creative project might be very unusual for them, or they may not know what's involved, and that's where the scaffold that's standardized becomes really useful. So I think the idea of giving the students agency over that template, it's beneficial, but it depends on where they are in the semester, how much exposure they've had to documentation and things like that, and whether they're really ready for that. The other thing is, like, if you've got multiple different disciplines competing, there may be multiple different views on what the documentation should involve. How do you coordinate that in group projects? And how does that template look? Like in Ideate, most of the projects are collaborative, and actually having some way of bringing the group together and kind of coordinating some understanding around the expectation is helpful for them. When you start with nothing, it's much harder to kind of agree and to kind of know what they've got to deliver. And ultimately, their instructors are probably going to tell them what they're going to expect in terms of the assessment, regardless of whether it's a template or not. So I would kind of put it back a little bit and say, given that there's a curricular framing and there's some expectation of what's going to be delivered in terms of their documentation, what latitude makes sense and where? And I think maybe looking at some example syllabi or the way that multiple faculty kind of pose the requirements around documentation may tell you about how much latitude different faculty offer. And I think there's probably no one size fits all. You know, some faculty will want nothing and see how they go, and other faculty will want it really tightly coordinated and templated. But within the gallery you can do both. So you can turn that template on or off, depending on what the course is or where they are in the semester. You can also customize it based on your curricula as well. So it's not a uniform, it's something that the instructors can edit. Yeah.
Also, so for you, the goal of having gallery is more of an instructional tool.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think there's any other goals for you or for Ideate program of using
Well,
gallery?
yeah, I mean the short answer is the gallery was built for one course originally. It was built for a course called Media Synthesis and Analysis as a platform so that students could document their work, give feedback through the comments, compare the feedback that they were getting, and see the highlighted outcomes, so that when students who hadn't done creative work before around media were trying to find the exemplars, they could figure out which projects in their class were the ones that were like closest to the mark. So there was 4 things that it was doing. It was allowing visibility on what everyone was doing. It was supporting kind of project feedback and critique. It was giving kind of a standardized way of producing that documentation. And then after the project was completed, it was creating visibility of what were the kind of the excellent outcomes, so that the students who wanted to understand where they need to improve had models to refer back to. And those were the 3 goals for me, like when we were looking at that in that particular course. But you know, since then it's been more broadly used. So there's many more competing objectives, and that was really tightly coordinated with that syllabus in particular. So lots of people have lots of different kind of expectations of use around it. You know, Kelly in Ideate wants to be able to use it to showcase what the program's doing and have it as a reference point for students. Faculty want it as a way to kind of refer back to previous years, so students in the current year can understand what was done by other projects and allow them to understand where the bar is. There's lots of different kind of uses based on like different kind of approaches and educational goals and instincts and things like that. And I will also say it doesn't fit everyone's needs. Like there are, you know, certain forms of documentation that it doesn't do very well, and that is probably an okay thing. You know, like there are other tools and other platforms out there that may do audio much better, or, you know, kind of, you know, store more technical reports or more detailed documentation. It's not designed for like extensive, lengthy, you know, 10,000 word essays, because it gets really cumbersome at that point. So for certain types of outcomes, it's maybe not the best fit, and that's where instructors might look to other platforms as well.
Oh, okay. So for gallery situation right now, it's basically just you are using it, or?
I think there's lots of different folks in Ideate. Dan Russo's using it, Jake Marsico's using it. I think Eloise Larson was using it for DigiTool, but I don't know who's taken over DigiTool now. There's another faculty member who's using it for his course. There's lots of different folks, engaged with it.
Okay, but it was not really like a tool for students to like use as their portfolio.
It was never intended as like a portfolio tool. It's not like a Behance, so it's embedded in a curriculum and a learning environment and those kind of things. And it was never designed to kind of replace a professional portfolio.
Okay.
It has a points because it does collect work for those students who don't necessarily have a portfolio or the inclination to do it. It does give them a place that they can show their work to someone who's interested or a prospective employer, and that's used sometimes. It depends on the student and what they're doing and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Because like on the student side, if they are making like a documentation for their portfolio for the course, and they also need to make another like documentation for their portfolio, it's kind of like double work.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
But portfolio documentation and kind of learning documentation are two very different things. And yes, some of the material will be reusable. Like part of the narrative is the same, but you know, like a professional portfolio should be highly curated, highly narrated, really well selected, really kind of well chosen. Like it should be effortful, and it should take an awful lot of time to produce. I don't think that the work that's produced on the gallery involves the same level of kind of portfolio making. Like you think about your portfolio, you choose the 3 most representative projects, you go really deep on them, you narrate the project from start to finish. You know, it's an involved thing, and it showcases like who you are as an individual. The gallery showcases a project that you worked on in that moment for a course, and I don't think it's designed to show like you as a creative practitioner. It's designed to show you as a learner. So yeah, you can reuse that material certainly as a starting point for a portfolio, but I think like this slightly different kind of they're slightly different in goal and audience and objective as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Also, do you think a gallery is more of like like the documentation is more of like a one-time work, or you think it should be like implemented throughout?
It depends. It depends on the project. So if you're doing a 1-week project, it doesn't make sense to be documenting throughout. Like it's just more work than needs to be. But if you're doing a 1-month project, then there should be milestones and there should be little bits of things that you're doing. So, you know, things that I do with students is I'll have them write like the proposal like 1 week, and then they'll kind of show that and they'll get some feedback on it, and then maybe they'll add like the kind of the precedents or the work that they're looking at, and then they'll kind of add that in, and then they're kind of fleshing out their documentation as they go and iterating it bit by bit, or they're collecting pieces for it, like some early sketch work that they'll post. But that tends to be on the more involved projects, which are multi-week. It doesn't make sense for the ones that are short and quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any like future like visions for gallery, or?
Yeah, there's been a lot of like I mean, a lot of different work that we're doing with kind of Epperly Centre, which has been a little slower than I would have liked, which is just to be able to kind of create instances of it for the departments. So there's a lot of folks who want to use it, but we don't have the ability to scale the infrastructure pretty easily. So that's one thing that we're working on. And then I think the other thing that would be nice is to kind of reconsider the kind of the process-oriented work. There's two things that will be nice kind of adds. One is more formally to think about the way that critique happens and the way the feedback is given and received through the platform. That's something that I've had in the back of my mind for a very long time. But also to think like the way that the gallery produces documentation right now is very product oriented. Like you do the thing and you write it up at the end of the project. It doesn't necessarily show a story around the process, and I think there are ways that you could balance that a little bit more, and particularly for those longer projects, it could help you accumulate the material that you need to then assemble the narrative at a later point. And it's not really doing that effectively right now. Like it's easiest to kind of write it at the end and put it all together from lots of different places. So I think it could have some better ways of kind of working across multiple people and telling that story.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, like, since you mentioned gallery was designed for a specific course before, like, what was your initial idea about like the design and structure of the website, and what are the what were the challenges?
What do you mean?
Like when you were designing the website, what were you thinking about? Like a structure, like any.
I really don't get what you're asking.
Okay.
Like what do you mean by that?
Like what was your design idea when you first like start making the website? Because you were
my design idea. Like what do you mean? Like
how did you
to make a portfolio tool?
No, yeah. That's the gallery, right?
Yeah.
You built it.
Yeah.
And how like the process, like how did you make it, and were there any like challenges and difficult parts to make the gallery tool, or?
Well, it was iterative. It wasn't like
Okay.
it was
You
made
just made it.
overnight.
Oh, okay.
So, for media synthesis, it was like there was a very rough prototype for the first year that we ran at, and that was much more focused on the kind of getting the bare bones documentation up and running and seeing how students worked with that. And it wasn't until the second year that we had a good kind of more friendly kind of UI that allowed things to be added. And so there were things that got added in the second year that were much more beneficial, like kind of being able so for the applaud button was added as a way of out of class voting on what we should pay attention to in class during critiques. So for example, if you have a class of 30 people and you want to review the work, the ones that should be reviewed you want to highlight and spend some time on. So I would have the class do an out of class review, and they would use that button to kind of upvote. And then through analytics, I could find out which ones were most upvoted, and we would spend time discussing those and reviewing them together in class. So that was a feature that was added later and worked really, really well. I think I have a specific use case on that, but in terms of the structure, I'm trying to think, like courses were something that was added very late. That was maybe in the third year of the project. It just started to scale, and it became really hard to see past years and iterations. I don't think courses was particularly well implemented, and it was kind of a patch. It was a hack for a problem that wasn't originally designed for, because it was designed for one course and then it grew really quickly. So that was never really well architected. And then I think the kind of the pool structure was fine. but that's always been a little conceptually muddy. But the idea is relatively straightforward. Like you have a project, the project is what you produce, it's contained in an assignment pool, and then that gets attached to a course, and the course kind of came later. But I think people still find that like three-step thing a little confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, I mean, there were definitely features that were built in that we thought people would use more, because originally, like, it was designed with the intention of being an entire management platform for Ideate, like it would do inventory and discussion forums and things like that, and those features never really got used widely, because, yeah, we went with different solutions in Ideate for those. So they were baked into it in the first year and then got removed later. So I think there is actually still the ability to message users through the interface and through their profile if you're signed in and validated. Yeah, but that's not really used. Yeah, I think one feature that is still problematic is, and it got better in maybe the third iteration, was forcing people through like a profile builder, which helps, but the people who don't go through it, it's really hard to link them to a team project because they haven't actually created a username and opted in, and that could definitely be redesigned to like just make it email based and make it much easier. So that's something that would be useful. Yeah. And then there's also just like, I mean, things that would make more sense going forward, which is kind of multiple email address being, like people often sign up with their @CMU and their Andrew, and then they can't remember which one that they've used and which one to sign in with. But they're like simple basic things that could be fixed in like the overall structure. Yeah.
Also, have you heard about any like feedback from students?
Yeah, we did a lot of feedback sessions and testing. So in the first couple of years that we ran it in media synthesis, we ran it with students, and we ran a focus group with students and feedback sessions within the class. And there were certainly rough edges that they highlighted, like things that they didn't particularly like, but are kind of limitations of the system, like not being able to kind of collaboratively edit like Google Docs, and that's just kind of unrealistic. And it's kind of like, it would be an ideal to have if, everything would be real time and synced and things like that, but that also produces some effects where it does force one person to take the lead on writing the documentation. And some of the things that I've kind of highlighted to you, like the kind of conceptualizing where projects lie and refining work, has been like stuff that they've kind of painted, or like the kind of mental model around projects and pools and courses and stuff like that. But I think in the course in particular, like students like being able to refer back to their work. They liked being able to refer back to other people's work, because then they could understand, what was expected of them and how to improve. They found that like gathering the feedback in a central source was really helpful when they were asked to iterate on their projects, particularly later in the semester, that they had a written record that other people provided that they could go back to, that was captured along with their project. They found it really helpful to have the models and know what projects were the kind of high bar to kind of work with and stuff like that. What else was in there? It was just basic things like, just actually having a written record was super useful for students, particularly of critique and feedback. And then I think people, like, one of the things that's a little hard and that we are working on is to try and make Canvas integration, so people being able to find like the links from Canvas into the kind of the projects themselves and where to contribute their documentation. So that will come in like a future version now that we're working with Eberly. But like that piece is something that we get a lot of feedback on. It's just like, I don't know where to go or what to do.
I can't even find a link. I was trying to look up, but I can't find it. I cannot log in either.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to find it again.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh, we've had lots of feedback from students. We also have like a feedback form, and we've gotten like technical issues and things like that that haven't worked for students, or problems that they've had with it. And we don't get many of those, but we do get a few every once in a while. But yeah, we've had lots of different feedback at different times. Yeah, it's mostly around the most painful part is kind of when it's a group project and they're trying to kind of edit together and get the stuff in, and that's hard. And then I think people struggle a little bit with getting the media to work the way that they want it to. It could be a little bit more flexible in that. So, yeah.
Also, do you like envision idea to be like a brand? Do you envision gallery probably be a brand for Ideate later, or
What do you
like
mean?
a branding thing? Like when you think of Ideate, you know like they have a gallery to view people's work, and also it could be probably like a cross school platform. Like you can see other schools course like projects are and all.
I don't know that I would like think of it as a brand.
Okay.
But certainly, yeah, I mean, that's part of what we're looking at right now, like making it easier for the schools and other institutions to kind of set one up and replicate it. So it would be something that could be broadly available to any department or school in CMU.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, like, what is the history of gallery? Like 10 years? No. 5
No,
years?
like 5.
Okay.
About 5. Yeah. Yeah, it's not 10 years old.
Oh, okay. Just
Yeah.
And do you have any questions to ask?
Yes, I want to know that because in like design school, like teachers ask students to use Medium to to document their like process.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think maybe Ideate is kind of like media similar to Medium.
Gallery.
Gallery. Sorry. What I'm asking.
Yeah. In some ways, yeah. I mean, the kind of the format is relatively similar. There's some other things in there that make it distinct, like kind of the templating, so that the instructor can guide what sections are written and the content that will go there. I think one principal difference between like Medium and the gallery is the way that the content is organized. Like, if you look at Medium, it's owned by the author, the writer, and that's the top level, whereas the top level in the gallery is the course, or the kind of the assignment that they're working on. So like the way that you view it is slightly different, and that means that you can actually compare across and look at different people's assignments as well. So like, while in Medium I can really easily see all of your content, it would be really hard for me to find all of the content from your peers in the same thing. So for an instructor or even for you, like trying to kind of figure out what other people are writing about, like that visibility of other people's work can be a really meaningful thing, either while you're writing it or after the fact as well.
Got it.
Yeah. So like learning platforms tend to be organized at like that level. And one of the big goals of the gallery is just to make the work visible so that it's organized in the same place. Now with Medium, you can obviously share the link or have like a way of finding it easily, but
not at top high level.
Exactly, yeah. So that will be kind of a distinction that I would make between the two. Yeah. But Medium's a lovely platform. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
What's the frequency do you expect students to use gallery for the courses?
It varies depending on the course, the scheduled assignments, and the nature of the assignment as well. So in some courses that I've taught, it's every single class is something posted or reviewed. And then in other courses, it may be towards the end, like as they're actually doing creative work. It just depends on when work is produced and the nature of work and when feedback is needed. I can't say that there's a one-size-fits-all, because like every curriculum is different and the learning objectives are different. So it just varies.
Okay. And do you have the concerns that students might spend more time on documentation than the project?
Do I have a concern?
Or how long do you expect students to work on their documentation on the gallery?
It depends on the project.
It's also depends.
And I think that was one thing that we found very early on in like the first iteration of the course, was that people were spending an enormous amount of time trying to work out the particulars of the interface, versus like actually kind of thinking critically about the work that they were putting in. And I think part of that is like the instructor kind of working to kind of help build like good kind of documentation practices so they understand how to like use it effectively, and how to write well and organize the content. But it does, like, documentation takes time,
Yeah.
and documentation should be an effortful practice. But like the thing that you don't want to get in, like, having stuck in the way is the tool.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely like in the first year and a half, the tool was a pain point.
Mhm.
Like it was just more work to get the documentation in than it was to actually think about the documentation. So yeah, that has been like something that's come up in the development of the tool a bunch of times. It's by no means perfect, because it's not, well, there's no like good strategy, because like whether you're using Medium or whether you're using like, you know, InDesign, or whether you're using WordPress, or whether you're using the gallery, like there's an element, like the first time that you hit that project,
Mm-hmm.
you have to learn how to author for the platform or the medium that you're working with, and that takes time. And there's no real way around that. It just takes time to learn how you can format your images and how you can arrange it, and to experiment with that and see what's possible. The ideal scenario is that you learn that kind of quickly on the first project, and then you get to kind of, you know, kind of be quicker at the documentation and the formatting of the documentation as you go through it. But that's not always the case.
Okay. And one question is, can we have the access to their feedback forms that you collected from
No,
the students?
I can't share that with you. It's under IRB, so it's research data, which you have to have human subjects approval to view, and you have to be a member of the research team, so it's confidential.
Mhm.
And I can't share that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Can we apply for the
We're probably
where can we apply for if we
We're probably not eligible to
okay, got it.
apply.
Yeah. Anything else?
That's all my questions.
I think yeah,
Okay.
it shouldn't take too much time.
All right.
Yeah.
So what are your next milestones?
We're gonna do like another round of learners research and
Mhm.
see what the students' feedback is like, and then like start the analysis model and find
Mhm.
the pain point, and then start making.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is our first step.
Okay. Have you met with
Risk
Kelly yet?
assessors.
Oh, we're gonna talk to
No.
her tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Kelly will have a very different perspective.
Okay.
Kelly will look at it from a programmatic point of view. She'll think of it like from broadly managing ID8 and everything like that. So it's a slightly different perspective that she'll have. You might want to talk to some of the students in ID8 who have used it as well. That might be
Yeah.
helpful. Have you reached out to any yet?
We have actually in our group. Do you know Jean?
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
Jean.
yeah, she's a part of our group, and she
Cool.
can connect us with some of the ID
Great.
students.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, and probably some mixed students.
Yeah.
Yeah.